2015, a British Egyptologist published a report that shook the world of archaeology. He analyzed millimeter-precise scans of the walls inside the most heavily guarded tomb in Egypt, and he found a detail ignored for 93 years. Beneath the original paint, there were unmistakable straight lines, the exact outline of two sealed doors. The Egyptian government authorized the use of radar. The results came in, and ever since, there has been absolute silence. No official confirmation, no excavation. The wall remains intact. The question the authorities refuse to answer is simple. If there is absolutely nothing hidden behind those stones, why does no one allow it to be open to prove it? She was, without a doubt, one of the most powerful women in the entire ancient world, a sovereign who not only occupied a throne, but ruled alongside her husband with the authority of a true living deity. Together, they did not just lead an empire. They orchestrated one of the greatest and most dangerous religious revolutions in human history. In an unprecedented move, the royal couple tried to replace all the ancestral gods with a single supreme entity. It was a profound rupture. It shook the political and spiritual foundations of a 1,000-year-old civilization. Temples were closed, priests lost their power, a new order was imposed with an iron fist. When the pharaoh met his end, historical fragments point to an even more fascinating scenario. The evidence suggests she did not back down. On the contrary, this imposing figure may have assumed absolute control, ruling alone for a brief and turbulent period hidden under a different name. She would have held the reins of a divided nation, walking through a political minefield created by her own revolution. But then suddenly, everything plunges into absolute silence. The narrative breaks. There is not a single formal record of her final days. There are no documents detailing her last moments. And what is even more disturbing, there is no catalogued tomb. The ruler who rewrote the rules of her era simply vanished from the face of the earth. For 3,300 years, her fate remained a shadow, the greatest archaeological enigma waiting to be solved. Until the year 2015 arrived. It was exactly then that the respected British Egyptologist presented a terrifying and brilliant thesis. He analyzed the official data. He looked where everyone else had already looked, but saw what no one else could see. His conclusion was that the legendary queen had never been lost. She was exactly where she had always been, resting in absolute silence, just a few inches away from the eyes of the world. The researcher pointed to the north wall of the young pharaoh's tomb, a sepulchre that stands as the most celebrated discovery in contemporary archaeology. According to his rigorous analysis, the ruler was sealed right there, less than 7 feet from the chamber that scientists have been scrutinizing for over a century. And it is at this point that the investigation hits an invisible wall. There is a subtle limit to official curiosity. Modern technology allows for ultra-precise scans. Engineering allows for clean drilling without causing severe structural damage. The physical answer is within reach. But mysteriously, the bureaucratic gears stop turning. No one gives the green light. No one authorizes entry, which leads us to an inevitable conclusion, and a deeply uncomfortable one. The wall is still standing, not for a lack of means to tear it down. It remains untouched because the people who control access do not want to find what is hidden in the dark. A secret that, if revealed, could rewrite everything we know about the most valuable legacy in Egyptian history. The most uncomfortable truth about this discovery is that it happened by pure accident. No one was looking for hidden doors. No one was trying to rewrite official history. It all started with a monumental preservation effort. A specialized team was hired to perform ultra-high-resolution digital scans, focusing on the walls of the young pharaoh's tomb. The goal was purely documentary. They wanted to map every crack, every peeling flake of ancient paint to ensure the integrity of the site for future generations. The generated images were made available to the public. The whole world gained access to the detailed files. And that is exactly what the British Egyptologist did. He studied the archives with the precision of a surgeon. He filtered out the vibrant colors covering the plaster. He ignored the divine figures drawn by the ancient artists. He began to analyze only the raw, cold texture of the wall's surface. And what the computer screen revealed sent a massive shockwave through the academic community. Beneath the paint on the north wall, the imperfections were not natural. There were perfectly straight lines, flawless 90-degree angles. In the organic geology of an underground cave, these lines simply do not exist. They only appear when human hands cut the stone. The expert identified the exact marks of ancient tools and the textures of the plaster blocks used to seal passages. The pattern he found was strictly identical to the hidden doors in other grand tombs of that same sacred valley. As you absorb the impact of this revelation, take a second to interact with us. Leave a comment telling us what city you are watching from. We really want to get to know our followers, and we love reading and replying to every comment. It is a great honor to have you join us in this historical investigation. Now, refocus on the structure of that chamber. Think about the logic behind this structural mystery. The boy king died abruptly and tragically at about 19 years of age. In ancient Egypt, building a funerary complex worthy of a sovereign took decades of nonstop work. But the tomb the whole world knows, the one found intact and packed with golden treasures, is architecturally bizarre. It is cramped. It is entirely too small. It has the exact shape of a mere antechamber, not a grand main mortuary hall. The expert's thesis solves this long-standing puzzle masterfully. The royal court needed to bury the ruler fast. There was no time to carve through the rocks of a new mountain. The most logical solution was to reopen the secret tomb of a powerful sovereign from the past. They adapted the structure, sealed the true owner of the tomb in the back, and buried the young king in an improvised manner right near the front. That space was never carved out for him. The most famous pharaoh in the world is, in fact, just the most recent occupant in someone else's home. And this is the detail that pushes the tension to the absolute limit. We are not dealing with amateur speculation. This analysis was signed by one of the most respected academic minds in the architecture of that sacred valley. His foundation is built on undeniable data. The hidden door is there, perfectly drawn by digital sensors. Physical logic demands that an empty space exists right behind that plaster. Yet faced with the greatest and most solid scientific discovery of recent decades, the response was not immediate excavation. It was a wall of bureaucracy. The Egyptian government demanded more proof before drilling into any wall. The stone remained intact, and what happened next turned a scientific hypothesis into a full-blown technological battlefield. Global pressure demanded immediate answers. To avoid tarnishing their image of transparency, the authorities caved. What followed was not an excavation, but a true invisible war, fought with radar signals piercing through solid rock. In late 2015, the first technological offensive was launched. A renowned Japanese expert, a master of ground-penetrating equipment, positioned his sensors in front of the painted wall. The radar swept the surface, sending electromagnetic pulses deep into the dark. The bounce back from those waves was staggering. The technical report indicated a formidable probability of hollow spaces on the other side. And the scenario went far beyond a simple vacuum. The machines picked up dense anomalies, signatures perfectly consistent with the presence of metals and organic materials deposited inside the hidden chamber. The impact of these readings was so crystal clear and undeniable that the Egyptian government summoned the world press. With great enthusiasm, officials told reporters there was a 90% chance the theory was correct. Archaeology seemed one step away from its greatest triumph, but almost silently, the bureaucratic gears began shifting into reverse. Just 1 year later, in 2016, a second round of testing was authorized. This time, the operation was funded by a television network from the United States, using a completely different technical crew. The result was a bucket of cold water. The signals produced fuzzy echoes, and the verdict was officially classified as inconclusive. They failed to confirm the secret chamber, but they also failed to prove the mountain was entirely solid. Immediately, government leaders backed away from their effusive support. A climate of hesitation took over the Antiquities Council. The final blow came in 2018. A third scanning effort was led by a group of Italian researchers. The document they handed to the government was surgical and lethal to the original investigation. They stated categorically that there were no transitions in the rock, no doors, no invisible corridors. The Egyptian government welcomed this report with open arms. With zero room for debate, they declared the case officially closed and the search over. But at this point, I ask you to look at the facts with absolute coldness. We had 3 distinct operations and 3 completely divergent verdicts. The British Egyptologists, backed by other heavy-hitting academics, raised a very disturbing question. The methodology applied in the third sweep, the exact one that closed the case, used settings that many consider completely inadequate for mapping the geological makeup of that valley. In practical terms, they used a far less sensitive approach. Why would a scientific committee use an inferior methodological tool to bury a suspicion that a superior system had just confirmed? The unspoken answer to this question completely changes the course of our story. The clash of reports was never just a debate about electromagnetic waves. We are about to understand that the real barrier keeping us from opening that wall was never made of ancient plaster or stone. The real wall is built by untouchable interests, which carry the financial weight of an entire nation. The truth, locked away in the dark, crashed head-on into a business that moves hundreds of millions of dollars every single year. To understand the relentless decision of the authorities, we need to pull the lens away from science for a second. We need to focus on economics. That underground tomb is not just a historical dig. It is the beating heart and the financial anchor of their entire national tourism industry. Every year, travelers cross entire continents with a single goal. They pay for expensive tickets to walk down those stone steps and look at the chamber that held the greatest treasures mankind has ever seen. The young king is an undeniable global brand. His legacy moves hundreds of millions of dollars annually. He funds pharaonic museums. He is the absolute protagonist, the untouchable icon of official archaeology. And this is exactly where we reach the breaking point of this investigation, the moment when the greatest triumph turns into the greatest threat. Think about what would happen in the exact millisecond a fiber optic camera crossed that plaster wall and the light hit the intact sarcophagus of the most famous and revered female ruler of antiquity. In that precise moment, the established narrative would collapse. The young pharaoh would be instantly demoted. The glorious legend of the boy king would be reduced to a footnote in school textbooks. He would go from the main character to a mere unwanted supporting actor. The whole world would discover that the tomb they idolized for over 100 years never belonged to him. He was just a royal intruder, a last-minute guest dumped in a provisional and improvised manner in the waiting room of a sovereign with infinitely more political weight. The official history would be unmasked. And there is a second factor, even more physical and immediate, that terrifies the curators. The wall housing the outline of the secret door is the exact same structure holding the most precious and well-preserved paintings in the entire room. The frescoes telling the story of the sovereign's journey to the underworld are painted right there. To drill through the block and prove the theory, engineers would need to operate heavy machinery inside the main chamber. One wrong vibration, one drastic shift in humidity, and the treasures we have already secured could suffer irreversible damage. It is a colossal gamble. If they drill through the plaster and find a collapsed hallway or an empty room, the painted wall will have been destroyed for absolutely nothing. Opening the passage to prove the hidden chamber exists means pointing a loaded gun at the artifact the world already knows and worships. Refusing to open it means condemning the truth to the dark forever. Faced with a dilemma of such severe economic and structural proportions, the leadership took the safest route. They chose to protect tourism in its current form. They chose to keep the door shut. And beyond that, they chose to end the issue bureaucratically, embracing the final technical report with profound relief, even knowing the methodology of that scan is heavily contested by brilliant minds in the archaeological community. The stone curtain was locked shut by the weight of the law. The financial narrative beat the instinct for scientific discovery. However, while official offices celebrated the end of a formidable headache, the unforgiving sand of that ancient valley began to surrender other secrets. Discoveries all around began to scream out loud exactly what the authorities were trying their hardest to silence. Official archaeology turned a blind eye to the North Wall, but the ground in that sacred valley never stopped talking. While technological tools were silenced by bureaucratic decrees, excavations nearby kept bringing the past up to the surface. The net started closing in around the boy king's temporary tomb. In the year 2022, independent researchers found something stunning less than 1,500 feet away from the epicenter of our mystery. They located a completely unknown mortuary chamber, completely missing from any official map. And what was inside was a massive revelation. There, resting in the dark, were human remains belonging to the exact period of that revolutionary pharaoh, the husband of the missing ruler and the father of the young sovereign. The sheer physical closeness of this discovery destroys any argument of geographical coincidence. It serves as hard proof that the royalty of that turbulent era used that exact specific perimeter to hide their dead. The circle grew even tighter the following year. In 2023, genetic science struck a new blow against the conservative narrative. Advanced lab studies mapping the DNA of already catalogued royal mummies confirmed family connections with surgical precision. The bloodlines verified by biology strongly reinforced the timeline and the line of succession that backs up the British Egyptologist's thesis. The political context of the time, the proximity of the newly discovered burials, and the genetic ties form a puzzle that points straight at the same mountain. And all of this throws us into a relentless question, one the Antiquities Council simply cannot answer. If she is not hiding in the dark behind that plaster wall, where is she? In over a century of tireless searches through the Egyptian sands, no other location has been presented to the world with the same degree of plausibility. No other crack in the rocks holds architectural evidence as sharp as the cut marks read by the digital scanner. The final resting place of this monarch remains a silent abyss. While mainstream archaeology ignores this question, the hidden doors theory stands completely alone as the only hypothesis backed by physical proof, the only one supported by radar anomalies and structural geometry, which forces us to look coldly into the future and project the absolute scenario. The exact moment the blockade is finally broken and light invades the last unviolated sanctuary of the ancient world. 21st century technology does not demand brute force. We are no longer in the era of rustic explorers using dynamite to open pyramids. Modern engineering has developed millimeter-thin drill bits and fiber optic microcameras no thicker than a human hair. It is perfectly viable to perform a micro-drilling in a surgically chosen and neutral spot on the plaster without compromising a single inch of the sacred paintings. The technical tool to solve the greatest archaeological mystery in the world already exists and is sitting on laboratory shelves across the globe. All that is missing is the ink on the paper, the official stamp, the political will to face the truth. If that authorization were mysteriously granted tomorrow, and the tiny fiber optic lens slipped through the wall to light up the inside of a sealed chamber, we would not just be repeating history, we would be witnessing the most colossal scientific event since the year 1922. And from a purely historical viewpoint, the impact would be infinitely more devastating than the discovery of the boy king himself. Think of the contrast. The young pharaoh left us an incalculable mountain of gold, but almost zero answers. His tomb was rich in material beauty, but painfully empty of political context. He was a fragile king who took the throne as a child and ruled under the strict control of generals and bureaucrats. The sovereign supposedly resting behind that north wall, on the other hand, was the absolute epicenter of a civilizational collapse. She and her husband built an entire capital in the middle of the unforgiving desert. They defied the ancient foundations of the most powerful clergy on the planet. The period when they ruled, the enigmatic Amarna era, is one of the most fascinating, controversial, and incomplete chapters in the entire human story. Their own successors tried to wipe their names from the stones, aiming to erase their very existence from state records. That is why finding the intact sanctuary of this ruler does not just mean adding new gold jewelry to the vaults of a luxury museum. It means finding the voice of a dynasty that was violently silenced, walls covered in unseen texts and hieroglyphs, administrative papyri kept perfectly intact by the absolute lack of oxygen, royal seals that would explain, with ruthless accuracy, exactly how the world's first great monotheistic revolution was designed and how it ended in rubble. We would have, right before our eyes, the ultimate document to close out questions that have haunted intellectuals for over a century. But before we dream of those answers, we must face a very dark detail, a piece of financial information that is rarely spoken out loud in respected academic halls. Bring your focus back to the third scan, that final sweep conducted by the Italian team in 2018, which categorically claimed there were no empty spaces, the exact report the government grabbed like a lifeline to shelve the case and lock down public debate. When independent auditors dug into the structural roots of that specific technical expedition, a highly disturbing pattern came to light. The funding behind that particular research had deep roots. There were direct links to organizations, patrons, and investment funds heavily tied to the Valley of the Kings tourism machine. A monumental and silent conflict of interest took shape right there. The exact same financial gears that would bleed hundreds of millions of dollars if the main attraction were overshadowed were intimately connected to producing the data that guaranteed the search was shut down. At this point, the scientific investigation, which should act as a neutral beacon of truth, seems to have been swallowed by intense economic gravity. Technology was not used to push the boundaries of human knowledge. It was strategically maneuvered as a tool for control and data suppression. The systematic refusal to use more precise methods or to run minimal physical tests does not prove the hidden chamber is a made-up fantasy. It simply certifies that no one, at least in this generation, will have the legal power to bother the ghosts that protect the prophets of the present. Exactly 3,300 years ago, one of the most imposing and formidable voices in the ancient world was suddenly silenced. Her name was deliberately wiped from the great stone monuments. Official history, written by the unforgiving hands of the victors, did absolutely everything to ensure her revolutionary and troublesome reign was forgotten forever. The majestic ruler who dared to defy the established cosmic order of her time became nothing but a silent ghost, wandering the hot desert sands. A monarch with no face, a spectacular reign, stripped of a dignified grave to cross through eternity. The modern world firmly believed it had definitively mapped out all the great secrets locked in that sacred valley. Archaeology planted its heavy flags in the dusty soil and categorically declared the era of monumental discoveries had come to an end. Until in 2015, the rigidity of that absolute certainty completely fell apart. The crack in official history started with the meticulous observation of a respected British Egyptologist. He analyzed the structural data leaked from official scans and identified with absolutely terrifying visual clarity the perfectly straight outline of two sealed doors. The exact location of this geometric anomaly is the historical detail that makes everything so deeply disturbing. The undeniable marks pointing to a blocked passage are not located in some unexplored abyss in the middle of the desert. They sit less than 7 feet away from the exact spot where international archaeology has focused its greatest investigative resources for over a continuous 100 years. Throughout the entire 20th century, the most renowned intellectual minds on the planet tirelessly walked on that exact same limestone floor. Presidents, great monarchs, and tens of millions of civilian tourists breathed the thick air of that mortuary chamber, all of them hypnotized by the glow of the sarcophagus holding the young king who died in his teenage years. And all of them, without knowing it, may have innocently turned their backs on the most priceless prize in all of modern archaeology, the true political owner of that grand tomb, resting completely alone in the absolute dark. A woman of global power, separated from technological progress only by an incredibly thin barrier, made up of hardened stucco and ancient organic paint. We clearly witnessed the violent bureaucratic clash caused by conflicting reports. 3 independent scanning operations were authorized. The first radar pointed to the strong presence of organic materials and preserved metal alloys on the other side of the plaster. The second test failed to establish a clear verdict. And the third major technological push, heavily funded by groups tied to the country's tourism industry, quickly and conveniently ruled that the wall was made purely of solid, impenetrable rock. The precision of modern engineering allows for an imperceptible, mechanical micro-hole, smaller across than a common coin. Modern machinery is fully available for clean, surgical use without damaging the surface art in any way. But no official excavation order was ever issued. The harsh government excuse, openly based on protecting visual heritage and strictly preserving the dizzying financial revenue of local tourism, acted as a highly efficient legal tool to choke out the academic search for truth. The government decided behind closed doors that the Golden Boy Pharaoh, despite having an extremely modest historical resume, must continue his untouchable reign. He is the most profitable and valuable tourism ambassador for that entire Eastern Republic. The terrifying possibility that educational books have been spreading a false narrative for over a century was quietly locked inside bureaucratic drawers, all in the name of unbreakable national cash flow stability. We have been civilly conditioned to trust that the clean search for knowledge of the past never bows to the commercial roadblocks put up by the state, but the massive block of rock keeping this legendary monarch isolated hands us a hard lesson about how the real world works. The record of humanity's glorious past is repeatedly held as a literal, budgetary hostage. Our retroactive knowledge is subjected every single day to the financial emergencies of current administrations. The exact second an undeniable academic find aggressively threatens to unseat the world's main tourist attraction, the brave curiosity of scientists crashes head-on into the solid wall of economic need and political secrecy. Because of this cold, invisible barrier, the central wall of that ancient Egyptian tomb still stands. The colored plaster covering the mystery remains completely intact, guarding its formidable enigma alone. In the dim light of the chamber, patiently and darkly, every single day, at the end of the shift, the electric lights in the hallways of that funerary complex are coldly switched off by the night watchman. They go out one by one right after the final exhausted visitor heads back up to the surface. The empty site loses its noise, grows perfectly calm, and the gigantic mortuary structure plunges into blind, impenetrable darkness. And right there, silently asleep on the other side of the plaster, the ultimate answer to humanity's endless doubts never stops watching us from the depths of the blackness. If this deep historical overview made you doubt that old, rigid version of the story we often consume on autopilot in our daily lives. And if your analytical mind understands the priceless value of dense documentary research grounded in raw reality without empty sensationalism, we invite you with the utmost respect to subscribe to our channel right now. We pour tireless hours of our time into carefully breaking down every hidden page of the past, using only solid historical backing. Use the large comment section right below to document your own reflective personal view on this cover-up of facts. In your mature opinion, does the danger of having to rewrite all of modern official history fully justify the cold act of covering up the greatest archaeological find our planet has to offer? Confirm your valuable subscription. Do not lose sight of us in this massive digital space, and always stay with us for when the heavy darkness finally gives way around another monumental enigma locked within this vast and fascinating frontier called humanity.